Hello, everybody. This video is for lesson 5.6. This is part one of lesson 5.6, and we're going to be graphing the inverse function, but we're also going to find the inverse function. I'm going to type out a few responses here of how you can find the inverse function. Number one, let me just type this out here. One. Switch x and y. Two. Solve for y. That's it. Those are your two instructions for being able to solve an inverse function, so please jot those down before going to the next screen. But the way you find the inverse function is you're going to switch x and y and solve for y. So here's our first problem. We need to solve y for x. So this is kind of the same thing. Let's see, I'm just going to have us cross this off kind of and just say find the inverse. And then we'll take care of the second part B in just a minute. So switch x and y. So number one, it says f of x equals 2x plus 3. Please keep in mind let y equal 2x plus 3. So let y equal 2x plus 3. I told people in class, for those of us that were in there, that when we're doing this, when we're doing notes now, I'm going to start typing instructions right beside it so that way you know what's going on. Okay, so I changed I changed y. I changed f of x to be y. And then second, I'm just going to switch x and y. So next, now I'm going to switch x and y. And when I switch x and y, what I end up getting here is I end up getting x equals 2y plus 3. Okay, after that, I'm going to go and solve for y. Y is always going to come up in different forms based on the equation that you have. So in general, we can just say that we're solving for y. And in order to solve for this y, I need to get everything else over to the other side of the equation, which means I need to subtract 3 first. I get x minus 3 equals 2y. And again, because I want y by itself, I'm going to divide by 2. Divide by 2. And I get x minus 3 over 2 equals y, and now I solve for y. So this process was solving for y. Now it says find the input when the output is negative 7. So there's two ways you could do this, and I'll show you both just for this one problem. For the first problem, to find the input when the output is negative 7, the input, this is the input, if you didn't know that. And this is the output if you didn't know that. So it's saying, instead of saying when the output is negative 7, we can just say when y equals negative 7, what's x? Okay, when y equals negative 7, what's x? So I can do negative 7 equals, and then I'll show you the other way to do this. Negative 7 equals 2x plus 3, and now let's solve for the input. So let's go and subtract 3, and I can get negative 10 equals 2x, divide by 2, and divide by 2. You get x equals negative 5, and that's how you get your input. So that's my answer. My answer is B. The other way I could do it, because I switched x and y, so here's the other way, and if you don't like this way, feel free to ignore it. But the other way I could do it, we switch the variables, which means that this is still an input. Now, so let me see how I want to say this here. Let's go down to this problem. This is the output from the original, and this is the input. Now, why is that true? Because x was usually input, but because we switched x and y around, the input is now the output, and the output was now the input. So a different way that you could have solved this is just taking this purple one and going in and plugging in the, I think it was negative 7. So if we plugged in negative 7, which was our input, minus 3 divided by 2, and we see what we get. Let's see, negative 7 minus 3 is negative 10, divided by 2 is negative 5, and we get the same exact answer. But again, if you don't like that way, feel free to not use it. I want to bring up one other thing here before we go on to the next problem. X minus 3 over 2 is called the inverse function. Okay, that's what we call that. We call that the inverse function of the original function. It can also be denoted, it can also be written as f inverse of x. And notice how I said that. I don't say f to the negative 1. I say f inverse of x. F inverse. And we want to be sure that we're not trying to do a reciprocal because we see a negative 1 exponent. This negative 1 is a very, 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 very fancy way of saying that we have an inverse. Okay, and that's what we're working with in this section. We're working with inverse functions, but let's keep going. Number 2, it says solve y equals f of x for x, and then find the inputs when the output is 2. So again, what I want to do is I want to go and switch x and y and solve for y. So I'm going to just copy this again. I want to switch x and y. That's what the question is asking me to do. Switch x and y and solve for y. Okay. Now, I also have this other instruction that says find the input when the output is 2. So I could do that right now if I want. So let's do that first. I got 2 equals 2x squared. Remember, when the output is 2, that means when y equals 2. And maybe I should just back up here for a second and say that f of x is equal to y. So that's just a little thing that we need to know. X is equal to y, so we have 2 equals 2x squared. And then go on and solve. So please pause the video and try to solve that on your own. Okay, I'm assuming that you ended up getting x is equal to plus and minus 1. X is equal to plus and minus 1. Okay, next. I'm thinking, okay, so next. Now I want to go ahead and find the value. So to solve for y equals f of x, I'm going to take y equals 2 of x. And this one. So y equals 2x squared. So I substituted y in for f of x. Now I'm going to switch x and y. So x equals 2y squared. And I'm going to solve for y. So I'm going to divide by 2 and divide by 2. And then I'm going to do x of 2 equals y squared. So I need to do the square root of both sides. And then my answer is y, because the square root of y squared is y, is equal to plus and minus root x over 2. That's my answer. I'll put some steps here. And I hope that's clear. Again, that last step was solving for y. This one is all of these steps. So next, let's go on to the next one, which is f of x equals negative x plus 3. I'm just going to move this over here to make this a little bit neater. When the output is 2, I'm going to solve it the other way now. So we'll first just switch x and y. So when we switch f of x and y, remember we need y equal negative x cubed plus 3. So that was first, y equals negative x cubed plus 3. And then I'm going to go in and solve for y. So I have to subtract y, subtract 3 from both sides. And I get y minus 3 equals negative x cubed. And to get x by itself, because I'm solving for x, I'm sorry here, I have one tiny little thing that I have to fix. I never switched x and y, so let's switch x and y. By the way, it actually doesn't matter when you solve for y, when you switch x and y, as long as you switch it at some point. So switch x and y. And then, so when I say switch x and y, maybe you weren't sure what I meant. I literally swapped out wherever there was a y, I put an x, wherever there's an x, I put a y. And now I'm going to solve for y. So I got minus 3 and minus 3. I got x minus 3 equals negative y cubed. There's a negative in front, and in fact, there's a negative 1 in front. So we have to divide out that negative 1 on both sides. Okay, and now we got x minus 3 over negative 1, or negative x plus 3, because it was x over negative 1, and it was negative 3 over negative 1. That's equal to y cubed. And then to get rid of the cube exponent, take the cube root, and then we get y, because remember the 3 here and the 3 there, that was from the last time. Those are all gone, and you're just left with y. And on this side, you're left with the cube root of negative x plus 3. And that's your answer. That's your inverse. This is the inverse function. Okay. So let's see what else we got here. So we have solve for y. So okay, I'm going to delete this part, so that's what it is. And so I'll be looking. So now to finally finish up here, we have the cube root of negative x plus 3, and the output is 2. Well, the other way we could solve for the output is we could just plug in 2 into this part here. So we have the output of the original. I'll write this out. The output of the original is the input of the inverse. The output of the original is the input of the original. And what that means is the y on the original is the x on the inverse. So if my output, if my y value on the original was 2, then I can plug in x equals 2 on the inverse. So I can do negative 2 plus 3 and get the answer that they want. Negative 2 plus 3 is going to be a 1, and I need the cube root of 1. And the cube root of 1 is a number times itself 3 times. That gets 1, and that's going to be 1. 1 is my answer for this one. All right, last problem. We need to find the inverse of f of x and then graph both the original function and the inverse function. Here's my steps if I need it. And then I'll be able to go and start the problem. So first of all, let's switch x and y. So we have y equals 3x minus 1. That's number 1. Then we're going to switch x and y, and we get x equals 3y minus 1. And now we are going to solve for y. So plus 1 and a plus 1 gets me x plus 1 equals 3y. And then, let's just switch this up here. And then we need to go and divide by 3 to solve for y, because I need y by itself. So divide by 3, and I get x plus 1 over 3 equals y. Now, at this point, that's my inverse. So this is equal to f inverse of x. Okay, and again, that's that fancy notation. F to the negative 1 of x is f inverse of x. So now the last part is I have to graph these. You're welcome to use a calculator, because that's what we allow. I'm going to see if you remember this, though. Remember, this is your b value. It's your starting value on the graph on the y-axis. So we have a negative 1 here. And the 3, this 3 means up 3 and to the right 1. Because it's a positive direction, so we're going in a positive direction for both. So we can go up 1, 2, 3, and over 1. And we're right there. And we have a line. All right, so that's the first one. There's the first one. And now the second one we have to graph as well. So now we have x plus 1 over 3. If you need to rewrite that because that's not as clear as to what it's, how to graph it, it's really y equals, if we rubber band this, 1 over 3x plus 1 over 3. Now 1 over 3 is a hard one to graph, but that's about right there. That's for that 1 over 3. And then this 1 over 3 is up 1 and to the right 3. So up 1 and to the right 3, which is about right there. And then let's go ahead and graph this one. Okay, we're ready to go here. And let's just change the color so that way we know what we're talking about here. That's your answer. And again, if you didn't want to do this with the y-intercept and the slope, you don't have to. I just wanted to put in some review there, but this line is f inverse, and this line is the original. That's where we started. All right, guys, hope this helped. Thanks.